I'm Warren Sharp of Sharp Football Analysis, and I hope this has become your new favorite sports betting podcast. I've assembled a team of experts, and we're going to be giving you some of our best bets with logical, reasoned analysis to support them from both the college football conference championship games and the NFL momentarily. Some of the games that we're going to be discussing today in college: Indiana versus Ohio State and Georgia versus Alabama. We got a couple of picks in both of those massive conference championship games. In addition, in the NFL, we're going to be hitting on what is a big key week of games. We've got Steelers, Ravens, both teams sitting at 6-6. Bears, Packers, huge game for the NFC North. Seahawks, Falcons, Bengals, Bills. That's a big game for both teams from a playoff perspective. Dolphins, Jets, and Sunday night football between the Houston Texans and the Kansas City Chiefs to round things out. We'll have analysis and bets for all of these games and more coming up momentarily. I'm 10-3, 77% on best bets for the podcast this year. I'm now 32-12 lifetime since we started the podcast last year. That's 73%, and I'll be delivering a best bet for you momentarily as well. But before we get into that, we're back with another $100 giveaway. The first touchdown last week in the Monday night game was actually Marcus Jones, a punt returner for the New England Patriots. What does that mean? It means that nobody guessed correctly. So it means that you have another opportunity this week to win $100. Just comment below who you think scores the first touchdown in the Monday night football game between the Eagles and Chargers. We will pick a winner to receive $100 added to the Novig account. Make sure that you have a Novig account. And if you don't, sign up with the link in the description to get a purchase match of up to $100 when you sign up. This is going to be a great and very fun show. Let's dive into it. All right, before we dive into all the outstanding games to preview for this weekend in college and the NFL, we got to recap a little bit of Thursday night because this was a huge game that went a long way for both of these teams, the Detroit Lions and the Dallas Cowboys, from a playoff seeding perspective and being able to make the playoffs. And the first thing is first, I got to just mention how big of a dog Amon-Ra St. Brown is for being able to gut it out and play in this game. Every single Twitter doctor that I follow on Twitter and pay attention to a little bit was either suggesting that Amon-Ra would not be able to go, or if he went, he would be severely limited, potentially leave early, potentially just be a decoy. And in part for those reasons, that is why we saw the line set for like Jamison Williams at 78.5, and his number got bet up to like 82.5. And I was part of the group that bet him from 78.5 over. I thought Jamison Williams was going to have a massive game because we weren't going to see much, if at all, of Amon-Ra St. Brown. He might be out there as a decoy, like paying attention to the Twitter doctors. As it turned out, and we were sitting here thinking that Amon-Ra was going to get ruled out. All of a sudden, he's playing. We saw Jamison Williams' line drop from 82.5, 81.5, 80.5, all the way down to like 65.5, I want to say, 66.5. They posted Amon-Ra St. Brown at around that same number. And so the sentiment was we were going to see a much worse game from Jamison Williams as a result. We'll get into that momentarily, but obviously I think we saw Amon-Ra produce, maybe it was 97 yards, 96 yards receiving. Just an outstanding game, outstanding performance, actually 6 catches for 92 yards. Great game for Amon-Ra St. Brown, and really remarkable for him to be able to come back and produce like he did in a game that the Detroit Lions needed to have. In addition, what helped and propelled this Lions team to this victory was the duo of Jahmyr Gibbs and Jamison Williams. I mean, these two guys are absurdly special. They are supremely gifted. I mean, that's the one thing that just stands out to you is the gifts that these players have. Just their ability to start and stop, their quick twitch, their speed in straight line, their ability to cut. I mean, they were making defenders look silly on this fast track of Detroit Stadium. They were making those Cowboys fall. The one guy I think was Bland. When they had the pylon cam at the first down marker, they were showing the sideline profile view of Jahmyr Gibbs catch the out from Jared Goff, stop at the sideline as Bland falls to his knees and then bounces like a basketball out of bounds. He sort of reminded me of when you're in elementary school and the teachers are teaching you what to do if there's a fire in your house and you have to get on your knees and crawl to underneath the smoke so you can just keep going and the smoke's not going to interfere with you. That's what he looked like. He was crawling out of bounds on his knees because there was a fire in his house. That's how pathetic he looked bouncing out of bounds there. And then you had the Jamison Williams where he turned on his afterburners and stopped on a dime and had to come back. I mean, he got open twice on the same route. Just ridiculous performance by both of those guys. They combined for 216 yards on 26 touches, 3 touchdowns. So Lions fans, I don't know if you know how good you've got it because so many other fan bases would love to see those guys on their team. Another thing that stood out to me in this game was the adjustments that Dan Campbell made offensively to attack weaknesses of the Dallas Cowboys. The first 4 drives for the Detroit Lions were 2 punts, 10 total points, and 96 total yards on 4 drives. In their last 7 drives, 296 yards, 0 punts, and 34 points scored. I mean, this team really made those adjustments and figured out how to attack the weaknesses of the defense of the Detroit Lions. On the other side of the ball, obviously, there was a bunch of disappointments here for the Dallas Cowboys. Of course, the overall result, the odds now that they're not going to make the postseason. So what are they going to be fighting for down the stretch? The CeeDee Lamb concussion, obviously that looked bad. That ended his night really early. He had a ridiculous game prior to that. I think he had 6 or 7 catches for 120 some odd yards before he left in the second quarter. So CeeDee Lamb was, who knows how great of a night that he potentially could have had. So then it's going to go back to George Pickens. After that, it's going to go back to George Pickens. But before we get to Pickens, let's talk overall. Dak Prescott, 31 of 47 for 376 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, both of which were tipped. Not necessarily his fault on those. When under pressure, he completed 9 of 13 for 166 yards and a touchdown, his 4th most passing yards under pressure in any game since 2018. He also ended up taking 5 sacks because of the pressure. The defensive pass rush from the Lions was consistent. It was intense. They did a great job of getting after Dak Prescott. Richard Sherman, after the game, highlighted what I was thinking during the game, watching George Pickens, and knowing that people from a fantasy perspective or from a props perspective needed George Pickens to deliver. And especially without CeeDee Lamb, it's okay, now it's George Pickens' show. It's time for George Pickens to shine. George Pickens didn't shine at all. He had, I believe, 9 targets and 37 yards. To have 37 yards on 9 targets against this defense, that is a massive problem. And I think he was pouting a little bit about the plays where he wasn't targeted. And I don't really understand his mental state heading into this game. But I'm just an onlooker. I'm just a viewer. I watch a lot more football than most people, but I'm certainly no ex-NFL player at the highest level. But you know who is? Richard Sherman. And you know what Richard Sherman had to say about George Pickens' performance after the game, which coincided with my thoughts on his performance and might have coincided with your thoughts at home on George Pickens' performance. This is what he said. The big story here was George Pickens. Throughout the game, especially late in the game, he looked uninterested in playing football. And that's what you can't have if you're going to be a superstar. If you want to be the best receiver in the National Football League, you can't ever appear to be disengaged. It doesn't matter if the game's going your way or not going your way. You can't disappear in these games, and you're not going to have the right impact. And these showing highlights, he's talking about how he was just cruising around and running around and slacking off on the routes and half-assing his routes, and called it completely unacceptable. And then he said, if you're the Dallas Cowboys and you're looking at this and you're looking to pay a big-time receiver money, $40 million, you got to look at this tape and say, hey, is this a guy that we can trust paying $40 million to show up regardless of the circumstances? I don't know. And a lot of those buzzwords that he threw in there, disinterested, disengaged, disappeared, half-assed, and those are not the words that you want being said about your performance on national TV after you play a game, especially when you needed to step up because CeeDee Lamb went down. And everybody was talking about before the game on a national level, you turn on all the talking heads throughout the course of the day about how George Pickens needs to get paid top dollar, how the Dallas Cowboys are going to try to do everything they can to pay him top dollar because he's deserving, about how he can coexist with CeeDee Lamb. There's nobody gets in their feelings about one guy going off one game and another guy going off another game. There's plenty of room to share the love and the targets from Dak Prescott here because nobody's jealous about anything. And then you get a guy showing up and playing like he did, and it instantly reminded me, like I went right back to the way that everything ended for him in Pittsburgh. There were games on national TV, I don't know if it was Monday Night Football or Thursday Night Football, where maybe it was Sunday Night Football, it was prime time, where he just wasn't running his routes. He was just off to the side doing who knows what. And you go back and look at the all 22 and show some cut-ups and tweet that out the next day. And it's embarrassing. And in part, that's why Mike Tomlin was like, we got to move on from him. He's not what we're looking for. The talent is supreme. The dude is an alien. And he's not Jameis. I mean, he is totally different than Jameson Williams or some of these other receivers. But his ability to torque his body and to catch the football, one hand, two hands over his head, stay in bounds while he's doing it, is uncanny. It's unmatched. I think he's truly special. He's got gifts in that nature. But the fact that he plays and shows up with the level of effort that he does at certain points, and sometimes major points, and sometimes on national TV, like I just don't care who's there to see it. This is how I'm reacting to what's going on around me in the locker room, in the game, the targets I'm getting. Who knows? Nobody's aware of what he's thinking as to why he wants to act like this, but it just did not look like he was putting forth his full effort in this game. And it was pretty obvious, and forced a guy like Richard Sherman to use that as his singular focus immediately after the game, where they passed the mic down the aisle or down the table to let everybody say one thing about the game. That is what Richard Sherman focused in on and had to say about the game. Last but not least, we still have these major officiating snafus, errors, credibility issues. I mean, in a game like this that was very important for both of these teams to have a shot at the postseason, to see the calls being made the way that they were is pretty insane to me and absurd. You clearly can tell when they're getting signal from New York and being told what to do or what to call, where Hockley is putting his arm around one of the refs and they're just standing there not saying anything, waiting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds, and then he makes his decision. That's where he's getting signal from New York. And guess what? I don't care. I don't care when they get help from New York versus when they make stuff up. We just want it to be right. And so it's fine by me if they actually would get help from New York all the time and got the calls right all the time. We just don't want the refs on TV quite as much, and we'd rather see the game action more. So get the calls right using whatever help you need as quickly as you possibly can, and then let's keep the game moving along here. And what we found is far too often the unbiased referee expert on these calls, on these primetime calls, is sliding in his chair next to Chris Collinsworth or next to Al Michaels and saying, I don't know what he's looking at here, Al, or I don't know what he's looking at here, Chris, but that's not how I would call it. totally doesn't look like that's the right way to call this. You should be calling it this way. I don't know why he threw this flag. There was that horrible offensive pass interference that wiped off a touchdown for the Cowboys that made them settle for a field goal. And look, that, the Lions were outplaying the Cowboys at that point. I'm not suggesting that the game result went the wrong way because of these calls, but I'm suggesting that these calls are embarrassing for the league, and it seems like they should be able to figure this out and clean it up and execute things a lot better. So, enough about harping on the refs. You hear that enough, but my goodness, this still was pretty darn terrible here on national TV in a major game for both of these teams. So that's Thursday Night Football in a nutshell. Great win for the Detroit Lions. Probably ended the hopes of the Dallas Cowboys. They've got more important things to figure out. Is CeeDee Lamb going to be able to return for next week's game? Or was that concussion where he was ruled out pretty darn quickly? Is that going to knock him out for next week? What's George Pickens' situation going to be like? How is Dallas, which seems like it's a somewhat of a fragile team that's been refocused with the additions and the signings that they got this past, trade period and the people that they acquired, like it definitely helped propel them. But now that they don't have a shot at the postseason, are all these guys going to continue with the same effort level here down the close of the season? It'll be interesting to see how Brian Schottenheimer can help steer the Dallas Cowboys the rest of the way. But that being said, we got a lot of big games to get started previewing, so let's dig into it. All right, guys, we have only 5 weeks left in this NFL season, and you want to win with us through the end of the year. And in order to do that, we have prorated our prices for the rest of season packages. Right now, you can take an extra 20% off of those prorated prices using code SHOW20. SHOW20. That will get you 20% off site-wide, no matter what you want to apply it to. Go to sharp.football, pick the package that's right for you, and use code SHOW20 to save an extra 20%. We have produced profit for our subscribers in 11 of the 13 weeks this season, and we've got our first 1.25 unit recommendation of the last 3 weeks. We haven't had one for the past 2 weeks. We're rolling one back out this week. We're 9-0 on those this season. So we finally got one of those for you guys this week. So if you want to get on board, utilize code SHOW20 to save an extra 20%. Before we break down some of our favorite bets in college and the NFL for this weekend, let's talk about some of the biggest games that are going to be played. The 8-4 Buffalo Bills are taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, it feels like the Buffalo Bills season is spiraling a little bit. They won convincingly against the Pittsburgh Steelers just a week ago, but you don't really have the same vibes considering the fact that the New England Patriots are running away with this division at the present moment. And the other side, you have Joe Burrow coming back for the Cincinnati Bengals with extra rest going up against the Buffalo Bills. And Joe Burrow has played really well at times. One of the issues that Josh Allen has struggled with this year, and we mentioned it on last week's show as it related to the Pittsburgh Steelers, was pressure and how much worse Josh Allen is when he's been pressured. Buffalo's schedule over the last 5 weeks, they've gone up against, think about the pressure rate of these defenses: the Steelers, the Texans, the Buccaneers, the Dolphins, and the Kansas City Chiefs. All of these teams are above average in blitz rate, and all of them but the Miami Dolphins are above average in pressure rate. So Josh Allen's been going up against teams that are constantly coming after him more than the NFL average and typically getting pressure at more rates than the NFL average. But now he's going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals has the lowest blitz rate defensively of any defense in the NFL. They also rank number 28 in pressure rate. So for the first time in a while, we're talking well over a month here, Josh Allen is going to potentially be able to have more time in the pocket to diagnose things, have more time in the pocket to get rid of the football without having to frenetically scramble around and go crazy with all these different complicated pressure packages that he's been having to deal with. Now, the Buffalo Bills tackle position has been beat up and injured, so Josh Allen's going to have to still overcome some of those weaknesses, but it's going to be a breath of fresh air to be able to go up against a defense that does not blitz and does not get pressure, unlike what he's been going up against recently. Sunday afternoon, we have Sam Darnold traveling to Atlanta to take on the Atlanta Falcons. And one of the big stories here is the fact that Sam Darnold and that passing attack for the Seattle Seahawks did not look great last week. It hasn't looked quite the same over the past several weeks, but specifically last week, it definitely underwhelmed. And the thought is that they went up against the Minnesota Vikings defense, who blitz at the highest rate in the NFL. And we know Sam Darnold has massive splits when he's being blitzed or when he's getting pressured. So now he's going up against the Atlanta Falcons, who blitz at a top 3 rate themselves. Will we see a similar type of lack of performance from Sam Darnold? Will JSN struggle in this game as well? Last week, he didn't come close to any of the receiving numbers that he typically provides. And this passing attack without JSN is very much negligible. I mean, they do not have much outside of JSN from an explosive perspective, from a gaining chunk yards, or putting up most of the production of this passing attack. So if you can't get JSN going, your overall passing attack and Sam Darnold himself is not going to look great. Now, they've been playing with leads, and so they haven't needed to pass at times in the second half of games, but Darnold looked terrible even prior to that last week. Well, here's the thing about this defense. The Atlanta Falcons defense actually plays single high safeties at 64% of their defensive snaps, second highest in the league. That is very different from what the Minnesota Vikings play, which is a lot of too high shells and really trying to keep everybody in front of them. That's not really the Atlanta Falcons strategy. And in fact, if you look back at some of the statistics in terms of what the Minnesota Vikings did specifically to combat JSN and the Seattle Seahawks, you'll see that they played 2 high safeties, the Minnesota Vikings defense last week against Seattle on 60% of dropbacks, which was their third highest rate that they played 2 high safeties this year. They blitzed at a 60% clip, and they played single high safety on only 33% of dropbacks. Well, let's look at the Atlanta Falcons. This year, I just said single high at 33% last week really helped slow down this passing attack. Well, the Atlanta Falcons have never gone a single week with playing anything less than 50% single high safety. Their average is substantially higher than 50% utilizing single high safety. You just mentioned it's one of the highest in the NFL. So even if they tinker and alter a little bit, I don't think they're going to be going to the extremes that Brian Flores does. This team has only played with 50% 2 high safeties one time all year. I just mentioned that the Minnesota Vikings versus Seattle did so 60% of the time last week. And their highest blitz rate in any game was 46%. We just saw Seattle blitz by Minnesota at a 60% clip. So Minnesota's defensive tactics and styles are very different than what we're going to see here against the Seattle Seahawks from the Atlanta Falcons. Now, at times that blitz will hit home. At times that blitz will cause problems for Sam Darnold. I still think there's going to be availability, instances, and certain throws that he's going to have time. He's going to be able to hit JSN on single high and going to have opportunities down the field. So I'm still looking at this passing attack to have some success, more success than they did last week. So just because they're going up against another blitz-heavy team, I don't expect necessarily the results to match what we saw last week against the Minnesota Vikings. Let's talk Tua, and I want to talk a cold Tua. Tua has played 3 games in temperatures below 45 degrees with Mike McDaniel as his head coach and play caller. One of these games is very unlike the other 2. One of these games was in the postseason in Kansas City. If you remember this game, where like some of the fans had to be hospitalized due to exposure. In that game, there were -4 degree air temperatures, wind chills of -27 degrees, and winds at 19 miles per hour gusting higher. And that's very different than any other situation that a player is going to face. That is not the situation that Tua is going to be walking into in New York this weekend when they take on the New York Jets. we're talking about temperatures right around 30 degrees or so. I'm actually seeing it warm up a little bit now. They're talking about maybe the temperatures around 38 degrees. So regardless, it's going to be below 45, but it's probably going to be at or above freezing or very close to it. Nothing like that Kansas City game. So there's been two games that Tua has played in similar temperatures. One was a 27-degree day in Buffalo in 2022. One was a 30-degree day in Green Bay just last year. Though the Dolphins lost both of those games, Tua's performance actually wasn't horrendous. 2 touchdowns, no interceptions in each of those 2 games. 7.8 yards per attempt and 7.9 yards per attempt in each of those games. He threw for 234 yards in Buffalo, but he completed just 57% of his passes in that loss. So it wasn't a very efficient game, but from a volume perspective, he still was there. And from a yards per attempt perspective, he still was there in large part because of some explosive plays that they gained. Last year in Green Bay, he was 37 of 46. That's an 80% completion rate for 365 yards. So Tua has had some performance in these games and isn't necessarily just automatic Tua's in the cold, so fade Tua. I don't think that if you're thinking along those lines, I don't necessarily think that's the right way to approach it because Tua's performance hasn't been a total disaster in these games, especially the weather that he's going to face on Sunday in New York. Now, that said, Tua has thrown for 205 yards or less in perfectly fine weather in 9 of his last 12 games. And that's because the Dolphins have swerved heavily into the run. And he's attempted more than 26 passes just one time in his last 6 games, while the Dolphins have resorted to a run rate that is second highest run rate in the NFL behind only the Seattle Seahawks. So they've gotten a lot more out of their ground game. They haven't needed Tua to throw the football. And we've seen coaches around the league lean more into that when they can. I mean, we see Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence. They've been trying to lean more into the run. So Trevor Lawrence isn't being exposed, throwing the football unnecessarily late in games when he's not the best quarterback. Same thing with Tua of late. So some of these coaches are doing that a little bit more. And certainly the Miami Dolphins are leading the charge in that regard. It's going to be interesting to see how Tua and this Miami Dolphins team perform in New York while it is going to be a colder weather day. Will it lean towards Tua in the cold and those narratives being spread? Or will it simply be Tua and this Dolphins team leaning more into the ground game? And as a result, Tua doesn't have high numbers. It's going to be a fun game to watch him versus Tyrod Taylor on Sunday in New York. Speaking of quarterbacks struggling, the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson absolutely have been struggling of late. And part of that reason is because of the myriad of issues that Lamar Jackson has had from an injury perspective. We just saw on Thursday, it was reported that he is not practicing again on Thursday. Now, he didn't practice on Wednesday. The thought was he might have extra time to rest, having played last Thursday, but he's dealing with an ankle injury now. It was his toe last week, and it's been all types of lower leg ailments. And quite frankly, I don't think we're ever going to find out exactly what's going on with Lamar Jackson. But one thing is clear. Not only is he not trying to run the football quite as often if he doesn't need to, he's been very inaccurate throwing the football as well. And as any sort of mechanics coach will talk to you about, the legs, the base is really going to dictate how the throw resolves itself. And when you're having all types of ailments in the lower extremities, that's going to affect your passing to a degree. In week 13, so last week, Lamar Jackson had a 25% inaccurate throw rate. That was the worst of any quarterback in the NFL last week. The week before that, in week 12, Lamar Jackson had a 22% inaccurate throw rate. That was the worst of any quarterback in the NFL in week 12. In week 11, the week before that, Lamar Jackson had a 28% inaccurate throw rate. That was second worst of any quarterback in the league in week 11. So for several weeks now, he has had one of the highest inaccurate throw rates, which is obviously going to impact the upside of the passing attack for the Baltimore Ravens. He's also taking pressure at a much higher rate because he's not trying to scramble quite as quickly, and he's not trying to move about the pocket quite as quickly. And if you look last week, he was pressured on 45% of his dropbacks versus the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals ranked 29th in pressure rate this year. So that is also going to impact when you're under pressure more and trying to throw the ball under pressure, your accuracy is going to dip a little bit as well. So there are a variety of things here that are leading towards Lamar Jackson, his passing attack, struggling a little bit. The good news is that they will be going up against a Pittsburgh Steelers defense that was just run right through last week by the Buffalo Bills. And I would fully expect, after a game that we saw, and I personally also criticized the offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, for the Baltimore Ravens shifting way away from the run and going way towards the pass. Did you know that Derrick Henry didn't have a single rushing attempt in the game last week in the second quarter against the Cincinnati Bengals? And this team really got away from the run too quickly in that game. And I fully believe that they're going to swerve directly back into the run with a lot of Derrick Henry against the Steelers team that struggled to stop the run just a week ago. So Lamar might be struggling, but fortunately this week at least, they should be able to lean into the run. And I expect from a coaching perspective, they might overuse the run, in fact, this week because this passing attack has struggled and because they got called out on not running the ball nearly enough last week against a bad run defense. So should be interesting to see how Lamar is able to perform and whether or not he does practice on Friday. I presume that he is going to come back to practice, but we shall see. All right, last topic before we get into some of these game picks and predictions. I just wanted to say something. I mentioned this in a separate video, but in case you didn't see it, Jeff Saturday basically called out Patrick Mahomes, saying that if Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs don't make the postseason this year, it's going to forever tarnish his perception of Patrick Mahomes and where he would rank Patrick Mahomes as a quarterback if he can't get this team to the postseason. And to that, I say, I don't know that you've actually studied the statistics of what Patrick Mahomes is doing this year. But after Patrick Mahomes won the Super Bowl in 2022, he went back to the Super Bowl and won it in 2023. And after the 2023 season, he led his team to a 15-1 record in games he started and went back to the Super Bowl again in 2024. This time they lost. In those last two seasons, won a Super Bowl win, won a 15-1 record that led to a Super Bowl appearance. Patrick Mahomes had worse passing statistics than he has this season. Patrick Mahomes this season was better in EPA per attempt than in either of the last two seasons, and he ranks number 6 best in the NFL. He's better this year than in either of the last two seasons in yards per attempt and ranks number 12 in the NFL. He's better this year in touchdown interception rate than either of the last two seasons and ranks number 15 in the NFL. And he's better this year in percentage of passes to gain 20 plus yards than in either of the last two seasons and ranks 11th best in the NFL. This has come against the number 6 most difficult schedule of opposing pass defenses. And by the way, in his last 5 games, he's going to be going up against 3 more top 10 pass defenses. So it hasn't been easy for Patrick Mahomes from a schedule perspective against some of these pass defenses, yet he's performing better this year than he has over the last couple of years. And if you want to look just at the fourth quarter performance, as to say, well, the Chiefs are losing these games in the fourth quarter, so it must be Patrick Mahomes' fault. Patrick Mahomes has better EPA per attempt in the fourth quarter this year than in either of the prior 3 years where he led his team to the Super Bowl for 3 consecutive seasons. Better fourth quarter performance this year from EPA per attempt. He also is better in air yards per attempt. He's pushing the ball deeper down the field. That was a big, obviously, criticism of Patrick Mahomes. He's throwing the ball too short underneath. He doesn't really have to do too much. He's pushing the ball down the field more. In the fourth quarter, in fact, he ranks NFL-wide number 1 highest air yards per attempt in the fourth quarter of games at 11.8. Also number 4 in rate of completions to gain 10 plus yards and number 9 in touchdown rate in the fourth quarter. So whether or not the Kansas City Chiefs are able to beat the Houston Texans on Sunday Night Football and make it back to the postseason, I personally am not looking at Patrick Mahomes in 2025 and saying, boy, he didn't make the playoffs this year. He must not be as good as I thought he was. Statistically, he's actually doing better this year than he has the last couple of years. He just isn't getting a lot of the breaks to go his way, and the defense isn't playing quite as well. And as you recall, last year they had an absurdly ridiculous record in one-score games. They also were elite on third downs. And so a lot of these things that we expected to regress, as they would with any team, are regressing for the Kansas City Chiefs. They're going to have to overcome it. Yes, they've got a great coach. Yes, they've got a great quarterback. Yes, they've got a very good roster, and they should be able to overcome it. But take a look at that offensive line health for this game against the Houston Texans on Sunday Night Football. It is going to be an uphill battle keeping Patrick Mahomes clean and that passing attack effective against a very, very good and aggressive Houston Texans pass defense. All right, let's dive into some of our favorite bets for this upcoming weekend. Now joining me is our college football betting expert, Ryan McCrystal. You can find all of Ryan's outstanding write-ups and analysis and game previews and predictions over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Each week he writes up several games and shares some really detailed analytical reasoning behind why he thinks a certain team might have a better chance of covering the spread than the odds makers might originally be estimating. This week, we've made it through the regular season, Ryan. We're finally here, conference championship. That means one thing. The bowls are right around the corner, and I love bowl season. Bowl season has been very good to us from a accuracy perspective, and we definitely lean on some of your insight this time of year as well. So looking forward to these big time games, and you're going to be breaking down a couple of them with us here. The first one, we're going to be talking about massive game, as you see on the Odds Jam odds screen. Indiana taking on Ohio State. Huge game here. We've got right now Ohio State laying between 4 and 4.5 points. Indiana catching 4.5 points. The total is sitting at most spots 47.5. This total opened a little bit higher at some spots, has been bet down a touch. Where do you think the matchup edge lies here in this game? Obviously, you've got a very, very confident head coach for Indiana, and you've got a team in Ohio State that absolutely is looking to steamroll these guys and send a message. So what's your thought on how this game is going to unfold?
Yeah, I'm going to side with Ohio State here and lay the points. I want to start out talking about a betting trend here that's really become too strong to ignore. Ohio State, since last year's loss to Michigan, they have rattled off 16 wins in a row. In that stretch, they are 14-1-1 against the spread. That's wild for a team as high profile as Ohio State. Usually betting trends like that, you know, to see something that strong, it's usually like in college, it'd be like a lower tier team, or maybe a bet that doesn't take as much money, like a first half line or something like that. But for Ohio State to be winning, not just winning 16 games in a row, but winning against the spread that consistently, it's pretty wild that they're continued to be undervalued. And so even in this big matchup, which I think will be competitive, I think that's one of the reasons why I like them, is that we seem to collectively be undervaluing just how dominant this team has been all season. Now, to get into the X's and O's of this matchup a little bit, one of the reasons why I like Ohio State is I think Indiana might have a hard time containing Ohio State's passing attack in this matchup. And it really comes down to the pass protection battle to start out, because if Ohio State can protect Julian Sayin, obviously he's got elite weapons on the outside. He's going to find them. They're going to get open if he has time to find them downfield. Looking at opponent-adjusted data here, these teams match up relatively well. Ohio State ranks 11th in opponent-adjusted pressure rate allowed. Indiana ranks 18th in opponent-adjusted pressure rate generated. So two pretty good teams, but it's worth noting that just last week, Ohio State played Michigan, which ranks 5th by that metric. And Ohio State's offensive line dominated Michigan throughout that game. Michigan only got pressure on Sayin 4 times in 27 dropbacks. So heading into that game, you could have said, well, Ohio State hasn't really played anybody. Maybe that stat's a little bit misleading, but they proved it against Michigan that this really is an elite unit. They are playing as well as those numbers indicate, even against the toughest competition, like a very strong Michigan pass rush. So I don't think they're going to have trouble containing Indiana's pass rush in this game, which means Sayin is going to have time in the pocket to find Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith downfield. And that's problematic for Indiana, because really the one weakness they have on either side of the ball is their pass defense downfield. They rank 93rd in completion rate allowed on throws of 15 or more yards downfield. Now, that hasn't really hurt them at any point this season because that pass rush has been so dominant. So against the lesser opponents, it's been harder for those teams to attack downfield because they're just creating so much pressure. We saw that particularly in that Illinois game. Illinois has a good downfield pass defense, but they were just swarming Luke Altmaier in that game. So he was not able to attack downfield and all. Indiana obviously cruised to an easy win. That's not going to be the case against Ohio State. They have the offensive line to protect Sayin, to give him time to attack downfield. And obviously he's got the weapons to make plays for him downfield. So I think that's ultimately the difference in this game. I do think it will be competitive. There are some other areas that I go into in the article on the site that details some spots where Indiana might have an edge. But ultimately, if you can't stop Ohio State's passing attack, you're going to have a really hard time beating them. So with this being a relatively small line, I'll lay the points and take Ohio State and predict that they'll wrap up the number 1 seed heading into the playoffs.
And definitely it's one thing if you are Ohio State and you are going to be able to have a little bit of success in the passing attack. If I'm the offensive coordinator or play caller, I'm looking to start out the gates quickly with that strategy to force a little bit of desperation from Indiana, to get them out of their game plan a little bit, to really, put a shock into their system, make them do something that they haven't had to do before, which is dig themselves out of a hole. So with that being said, if you think that they might have success passing the football against Indiana, and they might, as we think, maybe should start a little bit earlier, what do you think about the game total itself here? Sitting at 47.5, having bet under a little bit by the market. Do you agree with that move or do you disagree with it?
Yeah, I think I disagree with the market trend there. I would lean over in this game. Partially, like you said, it would make sense for Ohio State to come out and throw the ball early, which we've seen them do in big games. In the playoffs last year, they were very aggressive early. And you remember those first 2 games in particular against Tennessee and Oregon, they just absolutely blitzed those 2 teams in the first few minutes of the game, just came out chucking the ball downfield. Ohio State plays very slow, and so does Indiana. Ohio State actually ranks dead last in pace of play this season. But Ryan Day's talked about that publicly, that it's a strategy. He has a team that he believes is going to play deep into December and January. He wants to limit snaps, so they purposely play slow. I assume that's a similar reasoning for Indiana. We've seen a lot of the best teams. Ohio State sort of set the trend for this last year, and this year we've seen a lot of the elite teams that have been expecting to play in the playoffs all season play very slow to limit snaps. But now I think we're going to see Ohio State turn it on. And they actually tried to do that last week against Michigan. It didn't necessarily work right out of the gate, but very early in that game, they were throwing deep. They had a missed pass, I believe, on the first play of the game where they threw it deep. And then Julian Sayin threw an interception just a couple plays into the game as well. So it didn't work out, but we saw them enter with that same strategy. So I expect them to do the same thing, to try to throw the ball downfield and come out of the gates hot. And Indiana, on their side of the ball, they can throw the ball. I don't think Ohio State is going to completely shut them down. This is a good offensive line. They've got some weapons for Fannin Mendoza to attack downfield. I think they can, to an extent, keep pace with Ohio State in this game. So I lean over in this on the total as well.
Yeah, look, Lucas Oil definitely far better and more conducive environment than we saw last week. You said they were looking to do it in Michigan, but that game, the weather is cold, ended up snowing a bit, didn't have the opportunities. And I do think if you said that they were passing early out the gates last year in the playoff games, I mean, they have to feel pretty confident about their current quarterback situation that they've got going this year. Maybe even more of a reason to trust him to throw the football a little bit earlier in this game. All right, well, moving from Lucas Oil down south to the SEC championship game where we've got Georgia and Alabama. It seems like these two teams, their battles are always epic every single football season. And this one, they meet in the SEC championship game. If we look over at our odds jam screen, we can see that Georgia right now is favored by 2.5 points. Looks like the market's moving a little bit. We see some of these things pop in here, but Georgia's favored by 2.5 points, and the total is sitting right around 47.5 to 48.5. So once again, you want to shop around depending upon if you want to go under. Here's where you might want to look. If you want to go over, you might want to look at the 47.5 over at FanDuel. But Ryan, what's your analysis on this game? Who do you like and why do you like them?
Yeah, I'm going to take the points here with Alabama. Again, I think it should be a good game. Both teams certainly have a path to victory here, but I want to start out by talking about one of the trends, which makes me like Alabama a little bit in this game. Kalen DeBoer, obviously, he's taken some heat throughout his time at Alabama because he loses bad games. He's got some bad losses on his resume, but he wins almost all of the big games, and this certainly qualifies as a big game. And in fact, going back to his entire career as an FBS head coach at Alabama, Washington, and Fresno State, when he's an underdog, he is 9-3 outright as an underdog. He steps up in these games, 10-2 against the spread in those games. So this is the type of game that Kalen DeBoer, his teams are prepared for these games. Yeah, you can knock him for his lack of preparedness in certain contests, but on this stage, he is always ready and pulls off upsets at a shocking rate. Now, Kirby Smart's a great coach on the other side as well, so we should look at his trends as well to see if, is this the type of game that he typically wins? And the answer is kind of, but not really. When he's a favorite of a field goal or less throughout his time at Georgia's only 6-5 outright. He loses these types of games at a higher rate than you would expect, given all the talent that he's had at Georgia over the years. And they've actually lost 3 straight in that scenario, including against Alabama earlier this season. So this is a losable type of game for Kirby Smart, even though they're favored. And it's the type of game where we've seen Kalen DeBoer's team show up time and time again throughout his career. Now, again, to dig into the X's and O's a little bit and why I like Alabama, I think it comes down to Alabama's passing attack. I think that's the one area where either team kind of has a clear edge, because Alabama should be able to protect Ty Simpson. And again, like we were talking about with Ohio State, if you protect this Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback and he's got weapons downfield, he's going to make some plays here and there. So looking again at opponent adjusted data, Alabama ranks 24th in pressure rate allowed. Georgia ranks 63rd in pressure rate generated. So there's a little bit of a mismatch there. And that was definitely a difference the first time these two teams met. Georgia only pressured Simpson on 25% of his dropbacks. And this pass rush has been an issue for Georgia throughout the season, especially in big games. There have been 4 times this year where Georgia has failed to generate a pressure rate of 30% or higher. That's more times this season than the previous 2 seasons combined. So this is not your typical Georgia pass rush. And that's an issue against this type of team. One of the other games where this was an issue for Georgia, where they didn't generate a high pressure rate, was against Tennessee. And again, that was a game they ultimately won because they're just more talented than Tennessee overall. Tennessee has a lot of issues on defense, but Tennessee threw the ball all over the place against Georgia in that game. So in this type of matchup, when Georgia can't get pressure on a team and they've got a capable quarterback who can throw downfield to the weapons like Alabama does, like Tennessee did, that's a problem spot for Georgia. So I think that Alabama is going to be able to make some plays. And I also wanted to just quickly touch on why Alabama has lost some games this season and why I don't think that's what Georgia can do. In that Oklahoma game, they dominated Oklahoma from start to finish, but they committed 3 turnovers. It was kind of a fluky game. They lost some fumbles. Like, you can't count on winning a turnover battle by 3 in a game like this when 2 good teams. That was sort of a fluky loss, I think. And then in the Florida State game, Ty Simpson was pressured on 39% of his dropbacks, the second highest rate he faced all season. Alabama really struggled protecting him in that first game. They've cleaned up those issues a lot since then. So I don't think that they're going to lose in the way that Florida State was able to beat them right out of the gate, because that's an issue for Georgia. So, it's tough for me to see a way for Georgia to keep pace with Alabama if Alabama is able to throw the ball around. Now, it should be a good game. I think Georgia can run the ball. I think they can do some things to keep it close. And, a turnover here or there could swing this outcome. But I'm going to take the points inside with Alabama, because I think the one clear advantage either team has is Simpson when he's dropping back to pass.
That's some outstanding analysis. I was on the fence on this one as well, but your analysis is sort of leaning me in that direction. On one hand, you do have Georgia playing back-to-back games in the same stadium, a little bit of familiarity from last week against Georgia Tech. But on the other hand, you do have that aspect, not beyond just the X's and O's that you mentioned, where Alabama has won 10 of the last 11 games against Georgia, and Alabama in that span is 4-0 against Georgia in this Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So they have had a lot of success themselves going up against Georgia in this venue and Georgia in most recent games. So it's going to be a outstanding game. I think a great way to end the college football season with some of these conference championships. And of course, in case you guys are wondering, we are going to have Ryan back with us throughout bowl season. So just because the regular season has ended and conference championships are here, we're going to be talking about some of the upcoming bowl games every single week with Ryan, just like we normally do. And another thing that we're going to be launching next week is a real quick special episode where Ryan does some of the bowl pick'em contests, and he's going to walk you through some of his strategies. He's going to write an article about some of the bowl pick'em ideas that he has and give picks for some of those games as well. So you can find all of that information up at Sharp Football Analysis, but also make sure that you're subscribed to this YouTube channel or to our podcast feed so that you can get that podcast with Ryan when he goes and I think joins Ray to talk a little bit about his strategies for the bowl pick'em and some of his early thoughts on that. That'll be dropping next week. So with all that said, great season, Ryan. Looking forward to these conference championship games and then all the bowl games to follow. Thanks as always, and we'll talk to you soon. As I mentioned many times on the show this season, we've partnered with Novig, America's #1 sports prediction market, to give you an exclusive opportunity to try out their platform. They're offered in many states that sportsbooks are not allowed, including Texas, Florida, Georgia, and more. And right now, you can get a purchase match of up to $100 with code Warren. Just click Novig link in the description of the show below to get your $100 match when you open a new account. And don't forget, comment who you think will score the first touchdown in the Eagles-Chargers Monday Night Football game for a chance to win an extra $100. All right, now joining me is our fantasy football guru and loyal member of the Sharp Prop Squad, Rich Hribar, our fantasy football expert over at Sharp Football Analysis. You can find all of Rich's outstanding work up at Sharp Football Analysis, whether you're looking at fantasy football, you're looking to try to get your final positioning there for the playoffs, you're looking to get DFS information. He releases articles and analysis on his favorite DFS looks every single week. We got waiver wire, et cetera, covered over for you at sharpfootballanalysis.com. But we always get a few of Rich's favorite looks on the prop side of things for you guys in this show. And this week is no different. And we're starting with a running back in the Cincinnati Bengals, Buffalo Bills. Massively important game for both of these teams. The Buffalo Bills need to keep things rolling. They haven't been performing quite as well. Obviously, they've fallen way back in the AFC East seedings. And then you got the Cincinnati Bengals basically holding on to the thinnest of threads for their playoff lives, going into Buffalo, trying to pull off an upset. And you're looking at Chase Brown, and you're looking at Chase Brown's longest rush. And if we look at the odds jam odds screen right now, we can see that this line is 12.5 across the board, pretty much everywhere. So you can grab 12.5 minus 125 at most every single book that's out there. Rich, what do you like about Chase Brown in this particular spot?
Yeah, and I like this longest rush angle too, because we saw on Thanksgiving that his usage did drop with Samaj P. Ryan coming back, and the Bengals ran 80 offensive plays, which kind of masked a little bit, but his touches went down. He had only 51.8% of the backfield attempts, which is why I like to play through for the longest here, more so than just like a raw rushing yards, which maybe look favorable too to people, but they could have a lot more volatility. We're just looking to kind of get there on one run. We just need one run to stick. And he's cleared this in 6 of his past 7 games. Over the past 7 weeks, he actually has a run of 10 or more yards on 18.6% of his runs. That's second in the NFL behind Achane over that span. And he's going against the Buffalo Bills team that is 31st in the NFL in rate of runs of 10 or more yards allowed, 14.7%. I do expect this to kind of be more of like a big nickel, Sean McDermott type of game, light boxes. We're just looking to hit one here for Chase Brown. He's been pretty consistent on getting there.
And he's still getting that workload. And actually, I think people would be very surprised, Rich, if they look at Chase Brown's box scores and just what his longest run has been over the last 6 weeks. He's topped this in 5 of the last 6 weeks, and oftentimes by large amount. So I'm on this one as well. I like this one also. Next up, we're looking at a far more unsexy, if that's a term, quarterback matchup. We're not going with a game that features Josh Allen versus Joe Burrow. We're going to Shedeur Sanders in the Cleveland Browns against Cam Ward and the Tennessee Titans. And this one, you're looking at Shedeur's #1 tight end target, Harold Fannin Jr., and you're looking at his receiving yards. And as we see on the odds jam screen, there's some massive disparity between books. And so you definitely want to have a option like odds jam to shop around before you just randomly open up your sports book and throw it in there at MGM, because no, you definitely don't want to do that. Look, not only are you saving 4 cents, you're getting 3 yards of value over at DraftKings right now. Over 33.5 minus 111. That's where you should be betting this currently over at DraftKings, thanks to Odds Jam. What do you like about this matchup for Shedeur and Harold Fannin going up against this Tennessee Titans defense?
Yeah, if you can't feel alive betting a Cleveland Browns passing over, like what are we even gambling for? This is what it was. This is what it was made for. But this line is just it just feels extremely too low and mispriced. He has hit this number in 6 of his past 7 games. With Shedeur Sanders under center, he has a team high 26% target share. He's been on the field for 75% of Sanders' dropbacks. He's averaging over 2 yards per route run. He's been targeted on 26% of his routes with Sanders on the field. That would lead the position over the whole course of the season. And then we've seen a tight end against Tennessee hit this number in 6 of the past 8 games. It just feels extremely low, and I get it because it's a Browns a pass catcher, but he has been clearing this with regularity.
The other thing, too, in this game, having watched Cam Ward very closely in this Tennessee Titans passing offense last week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, I mean, under constant duress, hard to convert third downs, forced into a lot of third downs. It should give the Cleveland Browns a lot of plays offensively to work with. And they're not going to want Shedeur dropping back 40 times in this game if they don't need to, but still, they're going to have the ball. They're not just going to hand it off every single time. They're going to need to pass the ball. And you said that this number would lead the position over the course of the entire year if this pairing had enough of a sample size. Is that correct?
Yeah, he's been targeting 26.4% of his routes with Shedeur Sanders on the field.
Yeah, that's incredible. So we're looking at the low over 33.5 for Harold Fannin Jr. Okay, last one for you before we get you out of here is an old favorite of the show when back in the good old days, Rich, a couple of years ago, last year, when we were able to take Achane's longest rush over at just really reasonable numbers. And now this has gotten a little bit out of control as he's taken the league by storm. We're not looking to therefore pivot to we're looking to pivot therefore to his total rushing yards. You're looking at over 77.5 rushing yards, which again, you can find that over at MGM and Hard Rock. Don't go over to DraftKings right now because it's 79.5. So at 77.5, we're looking over on Achane's rushing yards. What do you like about this one in his matchup against the New York Jets?
Yeah, this one's a higher total, but it actually still feels low based on, kind of the game environment and what Achane's been doing. Miami swarmed really heavily into the run game. Over the past 6 games, they have a 50.9% dropback rate. Only the Seattle Seahawks are lower than them over that span. They've thrown the ball 8% below expectations in those games. And that has facilitated Devin Achane just being on a really great run. He's gone over 120 yards rushing in 3 straight games. He has over 20 touches in 5 straight games. Out of 38 running backs with 100-plus attempts this season, he leads the NFL in rate of explosive runs at 17.2%. So you can always kind of get a big boost getting that yardage and a big chunk gain. The Jets are also a team that they're not bad at it from an efficiency stance against the run, but they face 24.3 backfield runs per game because they're not good. That's 28th in the NFL. And as a byproduct, they allow 104 rushing yards per game to running backs. That's 23rd in the NFL. When these teams played in week 4, that played out similarly. Devin Achane rushed 20 times for 99 yards. So this is another one I think, too, you can even ladder this one up a little bit, although you don't have many jumping points going to 80, 90, 100.
Yeah, look, the other element here is the cold that Tua and the Miami Dolphins offense is going to be playing in. I'm sure if given his options that Mike McDaniel's not going to want Tua dropping back 40, 50 times in this game. Ideally, you increase that run rate even further than they have the last several weeks if they have the opportunity based on game state, and give the ball to Achane a few more times than you otherwise would with Tua dropping back to pass in this cold weather. So that's a great look for you to round it out for us. Everybody, make sure that you guys are following Rich over at Sharp Football Analysis, where you can find all of his outstanding fantasy insights and weekly predictions. It's great previews every single week over there from Rich. Rich, good luck as always, and we'll talk to you next week.
Good luck, everyone.
Now joining me is our NFL referee expert, Joe Gibbs. You can find all of Joe's outstanding analysis over at sharpfootballanalysis.com, where he breaks down the referee crews every single time that the league assigns them to games, has some historical referee statistics, as well as does some game previews in write-up format over there at Sharp Football Analysis. So if you like this stuff, go check it out and get more information over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. First up, Joe, we're going to be talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Baltimore Ravens in a pivotal matchup in the AFC North. Both of these teams are 6-6. And if we look at our odds screen right now, we can see that the Pittsburgh Steelers right now are catching around 6 points on the road in Baltimore. The total is sitting at around 43 points at most spots. You can still find a 43.5 over at FanDuel if you're interested in grabbing that number. A couple spots have 42.5. I will tell you 43, relatively key number in total. So shop around and make sure you grab that 43.5 if you're looking to go under the total. This game is being crewed by Alex Moore, who's a new ref this year, as you're going to tell us, Joe. I have not been overly impressed because of the high rate of penalties this guy has. So as soon as you told me he was calling this game, I immediately had chills down my spine. But talk to me a little bit about what his involvement means to this one.
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. It means a lot of penalties. If his first 12 games are anything to go by, leads the league 19 penalties roughly per game the last few weeks. And we covered him a few weeks back with the Chiefs and the Colts, and that was a disaster, penalties back and forth. So I sort of zero in on some of the areas where he really puts extra emphasis, and there's that offensive holding false start combination. He ranks second in combination penalties per game in those two categories, which is key. Particularly with Pittsburgh, I've looked up offensive holding. They're the least penalized team at home for offensive holding penalties. However, they rank a top 10 offensive holding penalty team on the road. The Ravens at home are a top 10 defense at generating offensive holding penalties. So just right there at the line of scrimmage with this crew in charge, zeroing in on those penalties and the issues that the Steelers have had on the road, it doesn't bode well for them on Sunday. Other areas that he focuses on, he's called the most or awarded the most automatic first downs via penalty, ranks number one for roughing the passer and for face mask penalties. However, 75% of those have been on the road team. So that certainly, potentially is nice for Baltimore this weekend. The game itself, look, it's Baltimore-Pittsburgh. That means it's going to be ugly. It's going to be choppy, probably frustrating to watch. I lean to the under on this game. I think, 23-16, something like that. But we talked about Pittsburgh-Buffalo last week, and it was an embarrassing performance from Pittsburgh. Historically, they will bounce back in this spot, but they look like dead men walking last week to me. That defense was on the field for 74 plays last week versus Buffalo. Now, you compare that to Baltimore, they have extended rest here. They played Thanksgiving nights. They've got a couple of extra days rest over Pittsburgh that was on the field a lot Sunday. I think Baltimore, a lot of the errors last week were self-inflicted, like the fumble at the goal line, a couple of interceptions that were kind of fluky. They just have the better roster to me. They're at home on extended rest, good home field referee with Alex Moore. Home teams are 8-4 straight up and against the spread this season. So I like Baltimore, 23-16, that sort of game.
Yeah, and if you look at this game, definitely bodes well. 9-1 to the under over the last 10 games that these two teams have played. All right, let's go to the next game. We've got the Houston Texans taking on the Kansas City Chiefs, another massively important game. Obviously. And this one, if you look at the odds screen, Kansas City is laying 3.5 at home. And the point total right now sits approximately 41.5 to 42 points, depending upon where you look. Joe, on this game, we've got Alan Eck on the call. What does Alan Eck's involvement mean to the outcome of this game and what we're going to watch on Sunday Night Football?
Well, his assignment is interesting to me, given what happened last week with Kansas City at Dallas. If you remember, John Hussey was the referee for that game. Very good home field referee, and Kansas City was on the wrong end of a lot of calls in that game. Alan Eck was a member of John Hussey's crew before becoming a head referee himself in 2023. So his statistics have essentially continued what he did with Hussey, which is being very good to the home team. 31-12 home team straight up with Alan Eck, and 26-17 against the spread, 61% with Alan Eck. So, extension of John Hussey. So the Chiefs had the wrong end of the stick last week, but did the league put Eck on this game as a sort of a, we realize what happened, and here's a favorable assignment for you on Sunday night in a must-win game. Some of the penalty categories here that are really interesting. The Chiefs rank second for offensive holding penalties per game. The Texans defense, which is unbelievable, they rank in the top 3 generating offensive holding penalties per game. However, Alan Eck's crew does not make it a point of emphasis. They rank 15th of 17 crews assessing offensive holding. So right there, that's an advantage for the Chiefs. Defensive holding. The Texans offense is the number one beneficiary of defensive holding penalties this year. But what do you know? Since 2023, which is Alan Eck's first season in the league as a head referee, no officiating crew has called fewer defensive holding penalties than this crew, and they're ranked 16th out of 17th this season. So a couple of things to keep an eye on there. There's a couple of areas that really favor the Chiefs just on the surface as we look at it going into the game. Defensive pass interference, illegal contact. X crew does rank above average in those two categories, but overwhelmingly they favor the home team in those. 75% of those penalties have been called on the road team. The Chiefs are a top 5 beneficiary of roughing the passer. Alan Eck's crew ranks second in roughing the passer. All the Chiefs roughing the passer penalties have come at home. And also the Chiefs have not committed a defensive pass interference penalty at home this season. They're the only team not to do so. So you start adding all this stuff up, and over the course of a game, if form holds, it's certainly hopeful to the Chiefs and basically a do or die game for them. The Texans have a little bit of wiggle room. I've been bullish on Houston, and I honestly don't have a strong opinion on this game. I picked the Chiefs because they're at home, but I'm bullish on the Texans. They're relatively healthy. I just wanted to cover the game because to me it's the biggest game of the week, and it's fascinating with this officiating crew on it, with the trenches and the offensive holding, and if they call it, if they don't call it, how that potentially benefits Kansas City in this game. But I would lean the Chiefs in a lower scoring game, 20-16, 21-17. But look, if Houston won Sunday night, I wouldn't be shocked at all on the back of that defense.
I was going to ask you about the total on this one. It's a low total, but both of these teams, especially with the offensive line issues that the Kansas City Chiefs are dealing with right now, would that be the way that you lean towards this one?
Yeah, I think they try to let them play. X crew traditionally, it doesn't call a lot of penalties as it is, and I kind of went through what they do call when they do blow the whistle. But yeah, I think they'll look to stay out of the way in this, and I think it's going to be freezing up there. I just think you see a real playoff style. Well, it's a de facto playoff game. That's just what it is. And so you're going to see, I think, a slower paced game, freezing cold weather, no team really wanting to take a chance as long as it stays like a one-score game. And yeah, you're going to get like a 20-16, 21-17 sort of game.
All right, well, there we go. That's Joe Gibbs breaking down the games and the crews. As always, we appreciate it, Joe. Thank you so much. Enjoy the games and good luck.
Great. Thanks, Warren. Good luck.
I hope you've enjoyed some of the analysis supporting some of the best bets that we've shared in college and the NFL. But now it's my turn. It's my turn for the Novig value play of the week. And for that, we're going to turn to the receiving yards market, and we're going to be looking at the Indianapolis Colts at Jacksonville Jaguars game. We look at the odds screen right now. I'm staring directly at Brenton Strange, and we're looking at his receiving yards right now at 41.5. The best value is right here over at Novig, over -113. And we're going to go over 41.5 receiving yards for Brenton Strange. Now, before I get into even what Brenton Strange has been doing for the Jacksonville Jaguars, I first want to talk conceptually about the Jacksonville Jaguars themselves and why I think they're going to need Brenton Strange more this week than they have in other weeks, which is when these types of spots show up, I think that there's more opportunity for value. In 3 of the last 4 games the Jaguars have played, they led at halftime by scores of 18-3, 14-6, and 20-10. Okay, we're talking double-digit scores in 3 of the 4 games. We're talking 22 points at the end of the third quarter. They've led in those games by 22 points, by 19 points, and by 15 points. Liam Cohen does not want Trevor Lawrence losing games for him late. Liam Cohen does not want Trevor Lawrence making mistakes for him late when the game is in the bag. That's why the Jacksonville Jaguars just choke the life out of games late often, because they've got a healthy lead. They've got a double-digit lead at halftime, and they're just trying to grind the football there in the second half of games. And as a result, they haven't needed to throw the football very much in the fourth quarter whatsoever. I do not expect that to be the case on Sunday versus the Indianapolis Colts. And that's because of Shane Steichen. Shane Steichen is the head coach and play caller for the Indianapolis Colts, and they're a top 3 team in first half points per game this year. They were also one of the best first half scoring teams in the NFL last year, even with Anthony Richardson as their quarterback. Shane Steichen always had his team ready with solid scripts to start games. The Colts have one of the highest first half scoring teams, as I mentioned. They've trailed at halftime by more than 4 points just one time all season. So very atypical from what the Jacksonville Jaguars have been going up against over the last several weeks. So that means a little bit more Brenton Strange potentially. Now, Brenton Strange just came back from injury. I'll go over some of his statistics momentarily. When he came back from injury, his first game back was week 12. He had 93 receiving yards. The very next week was week 13. He had 45 receiving yards. You know when those 45 receiving yards came? 100% of them came in the first half because they were up 18-3 against the Tennessee Titans at halftime and did not throw a single target to Brenton Strange in the second half of the game because they didn't need to. So he basically put up half the 93 yards in the first half of last week's game, and then they gave him the second half off while they ran the ball to grind that game out and end it as quickly as possible. If you look at the course of the whole season, when Strange has been healthy for the entire game, he's been healthy for 6 games. He's had 45 plus receiving yards in 5 of those 6 games. The coaches are certainly happy that he's back. They've been talking him up, having been back, saying positive things about him. And now he's going up against an Indianapolis Colts defense that is allowing 6.6 receptions to tight ends this year, which ranks 29th in the NFL, aka 4th worst. And they're allowing 8.1 yards per target to tight ends. That ranks 27th in the NFL, aka 6th worst. So this team struggles against tight ends. Brenton Strange has been getting targets since he's been back. He's consistently hit this level, and now he's going to be probably needed to be utilized later on in this game because I perceive a much closer, tighter game, one that Jacksonville doesn't lead early, one that Jacksonville isn't blowing the Colts out in the third quarter. And so I think it's going to be a game where we're going to get more Trevor Lawrence passing and Brenton Strange to go over 41.5 receiving yards. So that is my Novig value play of the week for week 14. As a reminder, make sure that you go over to Novig. You can get a $100 purchase match when you sign up. And if you haven't signed up yet, use the link in the description of the show below to be able to access that special code. We'll see you guys later. And that'll do it for the week 14 edition of the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast. Make sure that you guys are subscribed on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss another episode. We'll be back shortly. Good luck with all of your picks this weekend.